Welcome to Rewilding Love. This season is with a couple on the brink of divorce.
This is episode number 27 with Steve Adair.
I really feel I'm being asked to have a voice, and I feel the voice for me is to be sharing within the LGBT community or the gay men community.
This understanding helps people to connect with the truth that's inside of themselves so that there isn't that feeling of shame or needing to hide.
The moment that they feel there is no judgment there, without you even saying a word, something special happens within them.
We're all in this together. We're all brothers and sisters together.
They begin to wake up to wisdom.
It feels miraculous to me what can happen when people tap into that space within themselves.
We find a sense of nature where peace abides, where truth abides, where hope abides.
The healing happens through the connection with something deeper within ourselves where the peace actually resides.
It doesn't have to be pretty, but it will be honest and it will be healing.
That's what rewilding is, where we allow our naturally to let loose and just see what happens between the conversation, between love, between whatever.
You are listening to Rewilding Love with me, Angus Ross.
And me, Rohini Ross.
Rewilding Love is a podcast about relationships.
We believe that love never disappears completely in relationships. It can always be rewilded.
Listen in as we speak with our guests about how they share the understanding behind the rewilding metaphor in their work.
And how it has helped them in their relationships.
Relax and enjoy the show. On today's podcast, we're going to be talking to the wonderful Steve Adair, who is really quite an incredible man. And amongst other things, he is a 3 Principles mentor, a soul coach, a Reiki master, and a psychotherapist. Quite the smorgasbord of the mental health field, I would say.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you figured out how to say that word. I'm not going to even attempt to try and say that word. In addition to all of those things, Steve is also an international speaker, trainer, coach, and mentor, and he's worked all over the world. And he does have a private practice that's based in central Bedfordshire.
Yeah, I mean, he's the consummate Renaissance man, I'd say. And as a Renaissance man, what I really love about him is that in all areas and all fields of which he is, as I say, the consummate expert, he seems to lead with love. And for those of you who are listening to this podcast who are less spiritually inclined and think that sounds really woo-woo, as I'm sure I would have done when I first stepped on these shores many moons ago, that for me is the one way where you really connect with another human being. So if you're going to be in the mental health field, that has to be where you start. And he wants to lead the charge every step of the way in that respect, as far as I can tell.
Well, I think it's really beautiful how he is really clear that he's simply creating a space for the innate health and well-being to come forward within his client, and for the client to become aware of that for themselves, and that he's not putting anything in there. And I think that's the same premise that we work from, is that everybody has that innate well-being, peace of mind, natural state of love within themselves, but we just get caught up and forget and have an experience that's different than that. And because our experience isn't reflecting that in the moment, we don't realize how close it is and how easy it is to get back to that space within ourselves.
Yeah, and it creates inevitably a really safe container where people feel like they can really allow themselves to be honest.
Well, I think it really points to the simplicity of the work of helping people connect with their mental health. What Steve was saying, and I think what we would agree with, is that it's not about technique. It's not about strategy, it's really about creating that space of love so that that can be drawn out from within.
All you need is love, love, love is all you need.
Oh my goodness. I hope their ears aren't bleeding after listening to that.
Take it away, Steve.
In terms of our podcast, we started off the season, we recorded a couples intensive, Angus and I did, and we basically took excerpts of that intensive to then use as a way to illustrate teaching points regarding relationship and regarding a spiritual understanding that really helps people to have more ease in their relationships, to have more graceful experience. And I know that you've been in your relationship, you mentioned, for 18 years. And I think that that's going to be something really wonderful for us to talk about, because any relationship has its ups and downs, its challenges, its learning curves. And I think that we learn so much from each other. And also, we'd love to hear about the work that you're doing. My understanding is that you also do work with your partner or have done over the years. And so I think Angus and I are working partners. So it's always interesting when we add that to the mix. So I'm sure there's going to be lots to explore. And as we talked about before we were recording, as Angus said, let's get recording, is that we're really focusing on having diversity and inclusion in the podcast and really having different voices. And, you've been in a same-sex relationship for 18 years. That's not Angus's in my experience, but we can learn from that. And there's going to be things that are universal, and there's going to be things that are unique to that lived experience. And so I see it as an opportunity for greater understanding and greater learning for us as we participate, and then for our listeners as well.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to having this conversation. I've heard such good things about you and already, and at the fact that we weren't recording our opening conversation, I feel like I can't wait to dive into this. I feel like what you're already, what you're seeing and what you're striving for, in my mind, is spectacular. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So just to sort of recap a little bit, we had been in conversation, and then you had mentioned seeing a series that I had run with a good friend of ours, Julianne Shazad, about reimagining spiritual communities. And that seemed like that was also something close to your heart. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what spoke to you about that program, and we can go from there.
Yeah, sure. I think the word spiritual community is something that I was brought up with a faith. And I kind of my own way saw my spirituality through the religion, but I've always resonated more with the essence of spirituality, believing spirit within, spirit everywhere, everything's energy. So when I saw your spiritual community and that it had actually been, it was like, oh, okay, God hadn't planned that for me this time. So that's why I reached out to us. And I really feel, because I think a lot of my, in my quietness, I really feel I'm being asked to have a voice, and I feel the voice for me is to be sharing within the LGBT community or the gay men community. But when I looked at yours, what I saw, I love the word diversity, and I love also not really the words to describe something, but really getting to the heart of the person. Conversation. What's the experience like for you? Because we can read on media about many things, but are we getting the heart of the person? So I was explaining to you that when Black Lives Matter, I reached out to my friends of color, just to have a conversation. I didn't know what the conversation would be, but I just felt I wanted to reach. And we had tears, we had anger, but underpinning it was love. Also a connectedness of maybe ways that, gosh, I quite didn't see it that way, or busting my own bubbles of how I thought I was okay. And it's like, oh, actually, now that you say that, I remember many moons ago when I started, gosh, I'm going back maybe about 27 years ago, when I first did my very first counseling training. And we were actually looking at diversity, and actually, it might be longer, but it was when Oprah Winfrey started being shown here for the first time, and it was actually looking at colour. And it was something to do with the Redskins, native people, not wanting that to be used. So we were put into client, observer, and the coach or the counsellor. And we were asked to look at something diverse. So I was with a mixed race, Black woman, and an Indian woman, and me. And what was really interesting is I wasn't coming from England, and I had a very broad Scottish accent. So the three of us weren't kind of traditionally, even though they were born in England, I wasn't. But it was so interesting on how we assumed at that time. And I'd say to them, you know, if I want to ask you, what should I call you? And they says, please don't define me. And that was really, oh, wow. So let's really have this conversation. Let's really see how it is your experience. And I think that's where we really get to the heart of understanding what it's like for people, or the spirit expressing itself. So that's kind of, I know it's different from what I said before, but I think to me that's the heart of it. And I think there's so many of us out there in the world who are feeling that call, that wake up to step forward. And that's what I loved about in your communities, that where you were reaching. And when I kind of read the bios, it was like, oh, okay, I need to reach out and ask, are you doing this again?
Yeah. When you said that you feel a calling to have a voice and to be heard within the LGBTQ community, we'd love to hear more about that and what that is and what you feel you want to share there.
Sure. You know, so I've been with Tony on the 21st of June this year. It'll be 18 years.
Happy early anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I'm really, dare I say, privileged. But I certainly mean, when you say the word soulmate, we have so many different kind of, but I really know that this is someone for me that our heart really sings the same song. And even though there's different tunes sometimes, it's like we really kind of, I think the harmonizing is more. But I know from childhood, and when we listen to Tony's experience and my experience, it's kind of similar but very different at the same time. But there's a lot of suppression in there. There's a lot of still hiding from self in there. And I know a lot of is what I say, and I was brought up with the religion. So I always wanted to be a good Catholic boy. That goes against the religion. Having a spiritual kind of leaning goes against the religion. Identifying as gay goes against. So everything that I kind of believed in up top of my thinking, I started around about the age of 14 seeing something quite differently, yet I didn't understand what it was until I heard the very first time on Salt Spring Island, when I fell out of that thinking. And in that moment, I really saw how, and I know I can't speak for every gay man it's actually out there, but I've worked in sexual health as a volunteer, and then they created a post, and I worked supporting people living with HIV and AIDS, and then went on to work for the largest sexual health charity in Europe. And there was still that theme there of dysfunction. Not all gay men, but obviously the men that we were targeting and so on. And I just saw that if they could see their inside out nature really shining through, and a lot of the thing, and I've done it, and a lot of people actually do it, where I bought my way into happiness, and I've done different things and so on. But I've always known that behind all that, that's not what brings me happiness. So I did start, I think it was 5 years ago, actually I went to speak at one of the 3PGC conferences in Minneapolis, and over lunch speaking to this guy, and said, so what are you doing? What are you thinking of doing? So that's when I started voicing it. He says, actually, I know someone in the UK that you might be able to speak to. And it really tickled me, because here's me having to fly to America to realize there was someone in London who was interested doing the same as me. And so we started having conversations along with Tony, and we did start running men's group in London. of really just, getting that conversation just actually flowing. And rather than it coming along as and coming learn from us, let's start sharing wisdom. Let's start sharing knowledge. How is it showing up for you? And let's learn from one another. And from that, then I do webinars with that. And my passion is I did Men Behaving Kindly, a series of podcasts. And I really now want to put my focus on bringing gay men forward. Not just men who've maybe been inspirational to me, but also have a clear message to share also. Because I think as many voices as possible that can be heard allows someone to hear something. And recognizing that we're hearing from within. But I know that as much as my ego would like to think that, yes, I know it all and I've cracked it because I've done all the trainings you could hope for, I know that we're all vehicles of allowing people to understand themselves that little bit more. So that's where I'm beginning to focus. And it's interesting because I was saying to you, we were looking at moving house, and I keep on saying, right, when we move. And it's like, it's kind of that expression, tell God a joke so he can laugh at it, or so God can laugh at it. And so I don't know 100% what it looks right now, but the feeling is getting stronger when I look in that direction. So I'm just welcoming my quiet moments just to see what flows through me and where I'm wanting to share that. But it will be globally, whatever I'm doing. It's just not going to be based here. I do want to, because again, I think if we can learn from everybody else, and I think that's more exciting, and to hear other voices, because we all have love to share.
I so resonate with what you're saying, and I think that this is what's been so wonderful for me in the work that I do. And, I have been, I guess, around this understanding for about 5 years, but what I've started to see more and more is that idea that no one has a handle on wisdom. It's like no one has a direct line to God as per se. So everybody has their way of distilling their wisdom, and I think that's what's so exciting. Everybody has their own unique way of articulating it, and there is always something new to hear there. So I think that idea of diversity is, yeah, you know what, bring it on, because I want to hear what everyone has to say, because they all see it maybe radically differently or slightly differently or subtly differently, but they all see it differently. And there's always, that just presents so much scope for learning and growth. And so for the work that I've done, I love the point where maybe I'll have a coaching client, and yeah, maybe initially I get to share some of my understanding, but the playing field quickly gets leveled, and then I feel like we're having a conversation and insight can show up for either of us, and I might even get more out of it than you. So it's kind of like, why wouldn't I want to look in that direction? And it's so easy for, I guess, teachers to put themselves up on a pedestal, but we're all students in this together.
And I think he brought up a really significant point in terms of how this understanding helps people to connect with the truth that's inside of themselves, so that there isn't that feeling of shame or needing to hide. And you pointed so beautifully to how helpful that can be, especially within the LGBTQ community, because that can be an extra layer. Not that all humans don't deal with that, but that can be an extra layer because of navigating that life experience. And so I'd love to hear more about what you've seen in terms of your experience working in that community.
Sure. It's so interesting when you ask people, tell me about you. And we all have our stories. We all have our moments that we can say, well, yes, this happened to me and I was rejected and I was this. But when you ask someone to just simply just sit down and just share where you are right now, it kind of takes people back a little bit, because there's normally somewhere that they want the conversation to go to. So I just love actually doing that, where you just give someone the permission. And even if that's just coming out with da-da-da-da-da-da-da, because that's where they are in that moment, the moment that they feel there is no judgment there, without you even saying a word. Something special happens within them. And they begin to wake up to wisdom, is what we were saying. And I remember the very first time when at the beginning, I wasn't interested in listening to Sid because I was full. But I remember one of the things that grabbed me when he says, along the lines is wisdom is the purity of thought before the contamination. And it stopped me dead. And I always remember that when I work with people. And so I like saying to people, like, even though it's gay man to gay man, I'm not the expert here. Because the person who knows you, who's being your best friend 24/7, is you. And maybe, like me, you've not gave yourself the best shot. And maybe, like me, there's been similar stories that we can talk about. And there'll be wisdom in those stories. But let's just really kind of share where we are right now. And let's just give whatever happens a chance. Because for a lot of people, it's like, I remember at the beginning, I love talking about love. I love expressing love the best that I'm allowed to and I can in that moment. But I know not everybody is. And I know sometimes when I'll say that to people and maybe what kind of comes, it's like, whoa, I wasn't ready for that one. But there is still something exciting when we don't have an intention really within conversation. And I remember the very first time that happened to me, when I thought I was having a coaching, because I did fellowship with Chip Chipman and Elsie Spittle. Tony and I went over and spent time in Canada, and we were having a one-to-one. So I thought our egos were going to get, when I told them what was happening, they were going to say, well, you don't want to do that because that's ego. And it was nothing like that at all. And I remember when I had left, it was like, well, gosh, what was that all about? That was a lovely cup of coffee that we had. And of course, it's so delightful. But what was that about? And I remember walking back filled with, and it's like, oh my goodness, listen to you, boy. There's no room for anything else because your chatter is so loud. I'm walking through the forest and I'm not listening to the crunch of the leaves. I'm not listening to the birds that's singing along the way. I'm just stuck in there. So I remember those special moments because I woke up to me in that one. So I know when I just get in with people, and if they come with something specific, then obviously that's a little bit different, that we might talk around that a little bit. But inevitably, I still like people having a conversation. And we just see where the conversation takes ourselves in that moment. Just like when I was ready to come on here at 4:00 our time, I was like, okay, I'm ready to go now. I'm ready to go now. And it's like, oh, why have we made up time? Why do I have to wait an hour? And it's like, it was so interesting because I live in a village at the moment and we live at one end of the village. And it just seemed to get so busy outside. There was buses, there was the school kids coming home, there was people out the back, and it's like, I'm not going to hear a thing. I thought, Steve, there's nothing as loud as the noise that's going on inside your head at this moment. So I always remember that to be humble.
Yeah.
That I don't know all the answers, but I know that they do. And that's what gets exciting. And that's opposite from what's it been like? What suppression have you had? Have you been where you've been rejected? Did your family throw you out? We all have that kind of list of things that we can all work through and identify with some and not with the other. But that separates us. That makes you look very different from me. It's your uniqueness, your expression of life, but it still doesn't keep us necessarily on the same page because it still makes you look different to me. And there's a commonality, I think, that we all share. And when we start feeling that commonality between one another, it's beyond the words that we're able to express the experiences of what we had. And something magical happens there, where we do begin to find, I don't know if it's answers, but we find a sense of nature where peace abides, where truth abides, where hope abides. I remember I've always been a person of faith. I've always believed in there's something bigger than any of us. And I remember one of the times recognizing it's like when we have faith, and I'm a very hopeful person, but I saw them as two different things. But it's like, no, actually, faith and hope come together. Then it begins to allow me an intelligence that it isn't Steve. Steve expresses that intelligence, but the identity of who we've made up, when we have faith and hope, allows love to be the expression. And if we just start talking about love, then it's so interesting where the conversation goes. And it's not always lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's the interesting thing. But it's the right, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but it just seems to be the right thing in the moment. And when we don't have an intention of direction, that's where beauty and grace begins to dance with us and guides like never before. So it's really interesting when people say to me, can you write down what it is you want to do? And it's like, oh, I don't know until I know. I can try and write something down for you, but I don't know until I know. And that's the same for the other person. It's there too.
What I hear is just this incredible presence that allows the unfolding of truth, of love, of knowing that isn't you giving anything to your client or doing anything for your client other than holding that space with them. And in that space, the magic or the healing naturally unfolds, and that it's not through focusing, as you're saying, on life events or traumatic experiences, although we absolutely have compassion. I have compassion for that. But the healing isn't in the focusing on that, is what I'm hearing you say. The healing happens through the connection with something deeper within ourselves, where the peace actually resides. And then we can be with our life experience in a new way, with greater freedom, less attachment to it, and more connection with that love that you're talking about. So I thought you expressed that really beautifully.
You know, I was thinking that Rohini and I years ago did a program here in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica. And it was a 2-year program in spiritual psychology. This is before we were introduced to the principles. And there were many skills and many tools and many things that we came away with from that program that were really useful. But one of the first skills, and they would call them skills that we were taught, was heart-centered listening.
That's the second skill.
Was that the second skill? Oh, it just shows what a bad student I was. Okay, well, maybe that was the greatest skill, and that's why I picked up on it.
I will clarify. I was actually on faculty at the university, so I know the skills.
Okay. Well, anyway, but so for me, maybe at the time, I didn't really see the full value of that. But now, in doing this work, I so hear what you're saying, because for me, to show up in love and to connect with that person on that level. And you know, maybe that's something that has to start with me making some kind of intention around that. This is what I need to do here for us to have a beautiful conversation. If I really see, you know, their loving essence, another word, I guess I learned at school, but that's where the magic happens. It's like I can come in with an agenda, and here I am, I'm a coach, I'm a teacher, and I'm supposed to help you on that level. Really, you're going to help yourself. We're going to have this conversation where there is that sort of beautiful soup of love that we can somehow find our way into and allow ourselves to marinate in. And then hearts open, and then people feel like they can open up, they can be honest, they can explore anything. And it doesn't always, like you say, it doesn't have to be pretty, but it will be honest and it will be healing. And I just think that what you're seeing and what you're saying is so refreshing, because that's where, for my money, the magic happens.
You know, there's a little story. I was reminded of something that this morning. We haven't for 2 years now, but it's only for 2-3 years. We went over and did programs in Sweden. And the woman who asked us to come over reached out to me to say that she'd spoken to a couple of people who'd been on the program. And there was one guy So what we used to do is have a meet and greet or a general open it up to the public to come along and hear us just talk on a Friday. And this one guy had come along, and she got out of him is that a friend had been to the program we did before, and his life had changed completely. His work had changed completely. And he says, you need to come along and listen to those guys from the UK. So we're like, oh, okay. So at the end of the evening, I asked her in Swedish, because she just go and make sure that everybody's okay. So she was still kind of new to this herself. So she came up afterwards and she says, oh, that gentleman, he didn't know what he was coming to tonight. His English is good, but he was really worried that he wouldn't understand where you guys was coming from. And he still doesn't understand what you guys are coming from, but he's never felt so peaceful in all his life. Can he come? He didn't know you were doing something tomorrow. And now he's getting stressed because he wants to come tomorrow and Sunday. So you're like, okay, stop. Of course he can. I'm perfectly, just check with Tony, but I'm perfectly okay with that. And what was really interesting is that this gentleman had suffered a heart attack. I think it was the year or so before. And I don't know, and thank goodness I've never experienced a heart attack, but he's lived in this kind of ever since. And he just got a glimpse. Now, he didn't understand properly the language we were using. I don't understand the principles. Well, I've actually tried not to understand the principles language now, because I try and define it. But so I was like, that's so exciting. You didn't get what we says, but you're left with a feeling. Let's just start pointing towards that feeling. What is it saying for you? So rather than me coming across and saying, well, actually, yes, I remember, let me flick over 3 years ago when I heard Elsa Spittle or George Pransky say, this is what I want to say to you, because the moment's gone. How I heard it in that moment, it's gone. And the ego is very good at regurgitating, and it's not always good at telling it 100% truthful. So I realized that actually, Steve, you're very good at kidding yourself, at not being truthful with yourself, and you're spouting that off as being your truth. And it was almost like, oh my goodness, I've been doing that. And people were believing it. But I know, and I think, Angus, what you were saying there it was from the heart when I was saying it. I got to see really when I kind of fell out of my experience that time, is I got to see that the best that I could possibly do, I always done. And yes, of course, like everyone, we can look back and think, oh, gee, if I could change it, that would be, but that moment's gone. But I know from where I stand now, I'm no longer on the back foot. I'm no longer ready to, I'm firmly, my feet are on the ground. I'm with the earth, and I'm allowing the energy to flow between us in that moment. And that's beyond anything that Steve could kind of make up. And I just loved that. And that's what that guy saw in that moment. And when we had the conversation, and this is just over Facebook Messenger this morning. But what was really beautiful is at the beginning is that this woman, I don't know what to say to him. It's like, just go from your heart. What is it saying? And now she's beautifully coming from her heart. And he says, I'm still very confused over something, but I feel really good from speaking to you. And it's like, once upon a time, that just wouldn't have made sense to me, that I'm still not feeling good, but I'm feeling peaceful. No, that can't happen. You've got to be one or the other. And it's like, no, I realized, because I've seen that myself, where the storms of my thinking have been crashing, but my heart has been still. And it's just like when I remember 3 years ago, Tony and I went out to India to lead a retreat. And in Ladakh, which is at the bottom of the Himalayas. And I remember one of the times walking around the little village we were in and seeing the vastness of these mountains. And then there was a stream here. And when I kind of allowed my eye, the best that I could see the stream coming from way up top. And I was like a kid in a candy store, because I was like, how does it know to do that? Oh my God, there's a wisdom in. And I was like, okay, I need to slow down, because I've become so broad Scottish that Tony's not going to be able to understand me, never mind anybody else. But it was just that wonder in that moment that really didn't mean a thing to many people, but it was just seeing, oh my goodness, that's making its way somewhere. Now, in wintertime, Ladakh can go down to -40. And the interesting thing is, they still, even though, so this is going to be solid, packed solid, but underneath that river is still flowing. And to me, that's ours, that we may get lost in the ice cube thinking, but we still have our heart flowing. Our spirit is still connected to universal mind. And looking that direction with someone, they get to feel that where it's a little trickle, that boom for me is magnificent, because that's what moved those mountains. That's what created those mountains to support the ocean, to support the river, to get to the ocean, and so on. And when you start looking in that direction, it's like, let's see how we light up. Because what kind of is different from that conversation is that we're not talking about concepts or beliefs. We're talking about a word that you use, Rohini, magic. And I don't know what that means until we feel it in the moment. Where my Mary Poppins bag of experiences, let me just dive in there. Just hold a minute, just hold that thought. Oh, yes, this one. I leave it now. It's like, it kind of sits on the shelf. And I remember when I thought you were everything that I needed. And it's like, you are going to get as dusty as you need to be because I'm not taking you off the shelf anymore. And that just allows me, you know, we can talk about being humble, but it's different from when humbleness comes to you. To me, that is night and day different, where you bow to the moment almost. And you never know where that's coming from the street homeless or the homeless people that we've worked with. Like Angus, you said at the beginning, where this was Tony's background, and he asked me to come and run the program with him. And I was like, I don't know what to bring. And I remember one of the times actually talking to Jan Chipman, and she was talking about going into the prison services. And they'd asked them, and this is how I saw it. If you ask Jan, she will tell you a little bit differently. But what I heard in that moment was that the woman had said, so what is this married couple coming in here on a Friday evening? Are you two really that sad? What have you got to come in here? And I was a bit like, oh, they really said that to you? And she said, yeah. And she says, but you know what I found myself saying was like, I've never been in prison, but I know what it's like to feel rejected. I know what it's like to be fearful. I know what it's like to be sad. And if we start kind of just saying that that's a commonality, that at different experiences in our lives we've actually had, let's just see what happens there. And I've always remembered that I've never been homeless, but it doesn't mean that I have to see that person as homeless. Just a little bit like we were talking at the beginning, it's like with diversity, it's like, yes, you can see the person, and how does that person want to be seen? How do they want to show up? That mixed race woman, it's like, oh my God, do I call you a black woman? Or actually you're half white, so what do you want me? And it's like, just call me Bev. And it's like, so for her. And then the Indian woman, it was like, oh yeah, well, I'm Indian and I'm dressing with my traditional clothing, but yeah, just call me my name. And it's like, oh okay. I was expecting that we had, and it was like, no, and we really learnt that. And it's like, so what about you? You're a white man, but you're not in the country that you were born. How does it feel for you? And I'd never thought that before. I'd kind of just put myself into defining, this is what it's like. And that really got me thinking back then. It's like, actually, I remember being chased through town because I'm in a different country and they had a different accent, and the Scots and the English have a little bit of a kind of going. And I remember I didn't realize I could run so fast as I did through the town that day. I was quite, once I'd got my breath back, I was like, wow, did I run? Amazing what fear can do, right?
At some point, I think in the last couple of years, humility suddenly started to be something that I started to really consider. I'd like to think that hopefully I got to a new level of understanding, and that was something that I needed to learn. But going back to my early experiences moving to LA from England, one of the terms that I would hear is that we are a spiritual being having this human experience. And I used to think to myself, if those words ever come out of my lips, take me outside and shoot me, because I was so cynical at that point. But now I just like, that's where humility is like, there's the commonality. We are this spiritual being having this myriad of different human experiences. And on that level, yeah, we can relate to anyone. And in that spirituality, I feel like there is the love. There's that sort of love, that soup of love where we all swim in that. Whether it's like, you know, like you say, I love that metaphor, by the way. Underneath the ice of that, you know, that stream is running and flowing. That's the love that's coursing through all of our veins as this spiritual being having these different human experiences. We're all in this together. We're all brothers and sisters together. And it's like, that's a really good place to look.
I love that metaphor as well, because it really ties in with sort of where we're pointing. We use the term rewilding love for the name of the podcast. And it's really pointing to how that stream of love is always there. And we can just get so caught up in our concepts, in our resentments, in our hurt, and forget that that's available. And it's not about love for another person. It's about the love that's within. And it's by connecting to that we get filled up. And as Angus and I say, we're not attached to people staying in relationship with each other. Our focus is on helping each one of the couple connect with that stream of love, using your metaphor. And from there, making decisions. But yet we see time and time again how, you know, this sounds like a strong word, but it feels miraculous to me what can happen in a short period of time when people tap into that space within themselves. Things that they just did not think were possible 3 or 4 days previously, at the end of an intensive, they're like seeing hopefulness and possibilities in a way that just wasn't available to them. And so just the way that you're speaking to it, I think, helps all of us to remember the direction to look in, and to know with certainty, the way that you're talking about faith and hope, to know with certainty that that stream is always there, even if we don't feel like we're experiencing it in the moment. It doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means it's very icy on top. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. When I read you, it was the rewilding. And that's something that Tony and I have really looked at for the last 3-4 years. And they're in the west of, let me get this right. We used to live in Brighton, and it's West Sussex. Have you heard of NEP or NEEP?
I have heard of it. I don't know much about it, but it's familiar. I think someone else shared it with us.
I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, tell Angus, go ahead.
So Tony had read the book, so it must be maybe 30 years now, where traditionally it was a working farm, and it was passed down generations. And then I can't remember if it was the woman's family had the farm or the husband's, but basically they decided that they didn't want to do the farm, and the farm was actually killing our ecosystem and different things. So they took a really broad thing. And what they did is the land that they had, they've allowed just to go back to its natural state. And from that, insects that were gone have started magically coming back. Butterflies are magically coming back. They introduced wild boars, because that would have been traditional there. Long-haired horned cows. They've actually brought them back again, and they've allowed them to run wild. But the reason why I want to share it is because Tony was reading the book, and it was like, oh my God, moments that he was having. And it was, so he would share some with me, and then I'd kind of just go on with what we're doing, and then we'd share some more. But when we'd gone there, and I started walking around with him, and we had a little dog with us, and it had been very wet. So we had to be very careful where we were walking, because these roads are what they were like years ago, because they've not tarmacked them or nothing. Wow. They've let everything go. But I started wanting to giggle. And I said, Tony, I don't know why, but I just want to laugh. I just want to giggle. And I said, and I feel like when I was growing up in Scotland, when we had the big rocks, what we called them, the little rocks. And when you were over 12, because it was a main road, you could go to the big rocks. And that's where we had hide and go seek and so much fun and all these kind of things. But he says, so how many years ago would that have been? So we counted the years, and I says, but I just feel like the magic of childhood here. And he says, that's rewilding for you. And in that moment, it's like, and that's when I read what these podcasts are. It was like, yeah, because there's so many times that, again, we go back to the stories to define us. But we've had moments of laughing. We've had moments of fun. We've had moments of feeling that 24 hours are a month long when you're a child. And to me, that's what rewilding is, where we allow our naturally to let loose and just see what happens between the conversation, between love, between whatever. And that's what I always, when I look at the word soul, to me, it's sharing our universal love. And if we just get together soul to soul, let's just see what love wants to do with love.
That's
yeah,
really
kids
beautiful.
are so good at just sort of like tapping into the unfiltered truth and being led by that. And I can so see that's what you must have experienced walking around that farm.
Yeah, they live in that timeless space. Like you said, 24 hours could feel like a month. Like that real just being in the present moment and the fluidity of time is just so amazing in that space. Steve, do you have a little bit more time to answer some of the questions that we ask our guests who are in a relationship? That'd be great. As you said earlier, it's so lovely to hear people's experience and to know that who knows what different experiences are going to touch people. So these are just questions about your relationship that really touch our listeners. It's just heartwarming to hear how other people navigate relationship. So, and if there's any question you don't want to answer, just tell us, skip that one.
We can edit it out.
So the first one is, what is one of your fondest memories in your relationship? Gosh,
cliche, but there's been so many.
Yeah.
But what kind of just came with it is our quiet moments together. We've done so much together, and there's been some incredible holidays. And when I mean that, I don't mean it's like we've made this conscious decision is let's just be quiet, but just when we've just instinctively got quiet. So I think there's the WOMAD Festival, World of Music, Arts and Dance, that we go to. We had to get last year because it wasn't on, but it's back on this year. And there's moments at that where the music, you realize, is moving you more beyond your thinking. And we've just looked at one another and it's like kind of, oh my God, they're incredible. And it's just that childhood moment again, all over again. It's just everything that's been very cherished on that. So yeah, I think they're the kind of moments when we've not had any, let's just go here and see, and ended up having the best time of our life. We had that yesterday. We ended up going for a walk with the dog. It was like, should we just get in the car and see where we end up? And we'll find somewhere to park and then we'll just walk. And so we haven't got a clue where we're going and we just love it. And they're also very special moments.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the moments where we're not kind of controlling ourselves seems to be the best.
Yeah, I love that. Well, what is one of the funniest memories in your relationship?
Well, actually, the one that comes to mind, which at the time I didn't think was funny at all, but I remember it was, so I'm going back maybe about 14 years ago, and we've always loved walking. And we went for this walk and got lost on the way back. And there was this river, and then there was like just this very thick pole going across it, and I was like, I cannot go over this, because if I fall in that, he's going to think I'm ridiculous, and he's going to think, and it's like I was still at the part where I needed to kind of pretend that I was this really cool guy. We're still in the honeymoon period, if you like, and I did it, and I was really pleased with myself. And then a little bit further in, there was a little puddle, and I put my foot in the puddle. And so even though it wasn't, my reason for sharing that was I put so much expectation where it was, isn't this a wonderful walk? I wouldn't be anywhere else in the world right now until the river. So I think for me, that was the funniest, where I got to see how ridiculous I could be.
Right. How quickly things can change.
Yes.
I thought you were going to fall in.
Well, I did too.
So the next one is, what is a difficult time in your relationship and how did you get through it?
Well, I think real time, I shared with you, we're hoping to be moving house, and we should have been moved easily 2 months ago. But the person that's buying our house is, I could say the word difficult to help you kind of look in that direction. And we have been, it really helped me when I heard Sid talk about separate realities. And when he gave the kind of metaphor of the glass kind of lifts going up and down. And, sometimes simplicity is really the easiest set of keys to click open our understanding. And we've gone through we joke, we're both fire signs. So we're vroom, and then we're down again. And normally one is and the other one isn't. But of course, through these bits, there's moments I've got completely lost. We need to, we've got to, and this kind of thing. And it's like Tony's just stood and watched me and kind of just let me go on with it, and vice versa. And that has been the greatest gift, really, is to realize that I don't have to sort Tony out. I don't have to take on what's going on for him. And actually being that in that space allows me to clearly see more what's going on for him, whether it's just getting lost in your thinking or whether it is. So there was one of the times that I really wanted to pull the plug on it all. And Tony says, no, I don't think and it's like, oh, for God's sake, are we ever really going to agree on this? And I was hearing myself thinking, who is this man? Who's channeling you at the moment? Because this is not you. You're not heart-centered here. And I just heard myself saying to Tony, do you really trust your feeling on this? And he says, yes. And I knew then, because that was a very different feeling from, we need to, we've got to, and he just says it with such a clarity that I knew I could trust that. And so I think being open to knowing that I don't have to control it all. I don't know it all. And that we are in a relationship, and a relationship is a flow of energy between. And that means that at times I'm going to not get it right, and at other times I will, and that will be the same as well. And it's not really about focusing on the right or the wrong, it's just what we're doing at the moment. So how we get through it is giving each other space, allowing each other to have those moments, and realizing that will pass. And then we'll get to a place. We went out for one of our walks, and Tony says, I don't know if I want to move to the barn. And I could feel myself and it was just like, okay, he's got it right if he wants to think that at the moment. And then later on, I'll pick the conversation up if it feels right. And of course, about 3-4 hours later, he's talking about the excitement of being at the barn and what we're going to do. And it's like, see, that's what happens when we don't engage in ego or intellect. The person instinctively, naturally, because of who we're designed, we move along. And if he was stuck because I wasn't jumping in there trying to sort it out, then I'd have been more open state of mind to be in a space to hold support or whatever needed to happen in that moment.
That's beautiful.
That's profound. How do you divide domestic labor in your relationship?
It's so interesting because it hasn't happened for years, but has been in a gay relationship. It's like, so who's the man and who's the woman?
Right.
Like, actually, there isn't that. We're both men. And it's like, so it's interesting because moving house, we've kind of going into the roles that we've just done, or the roles that we've kind of not necessarily are good at, but enjoy doing it. And that's been more helpful. So Tony will do the more kind of, right, this is me and I'll go out and I'll do it. It's like, cool, do you enjoy doing that? And I enjoy tidying up, and I enjoy making sure. And I don't know if that was kind of brought up with a Scottish mum, that if you were leaving a house, it has to be leave spotless with the little tail behind so no one can talk about you. And it's like, so that's what drives you cleaning, mum, not that you want your house to be lovely and tidy. So I have that little kind of back thing going on. But I think, we just find our way. It's like when Tony took a little job over when we came here, when my mum was still sick at the time, working with adults with learning difficulties in a community near us. And we were eating mainly paleo way of life then. And so Tony was mainly doing it because he was the thing that was into it. And it's like, so let's switches you on. So I'll follow your lead on that one. So then all of a sudden he was out working and I was the one that was going to be cooking and so on. And I started getting really creative and really excited. So then I took over all the cooking that was actually happening. And we're kind of naturally like that. It's just, we find that balance of what we both enjoy. And even if it's something I'm thinking, oh God, I really wanted to do that, I just see the enjoyment in his face. And that's good enough for me.
That's lovely. It's really, I think, helpful when we can appreciate the skills and talents of partners and say like, yeah, you're much better at that. Like Angus can fix things. And like, he's laid the wood floors down in our home. I'm like, I could not do that in a million years.
Yeah. No, I guess it's about finding your groove, isn't it?
That's right. So how are finances handled in your relationship?
Well, that's interesting because we both have our own coming in, but then there's a pot that the pot's kind of looked for. But I say that's really interesting because really since we've come along and really got to understand that buying things don't define us, then we've become very simple creatures. Which means, well, as I say that, but we're moving home and I'm already looking at the nice things that we're going to be buying. I'm saying to Tony a little bit like, wouldn't this look really good across that wall? And so we have a pot, and then after that, our owners are on.
What was the biggest misunderstanding you woke up from in your relationship?
I think I hit on it a little bit before, that I had to be the sorter. I was the one that had to make it all right. That was really me feeding into I need to be a good little boy growing up. And realizing that with all the skills and the tools that I had from training in psychology and still wasn't working sometimes. We talked about the river. When I realized I was pushing the river or trying to push the river, and of course you inevitably get soaking wet. When I realized that I'm not responsible, that was a big thing to wake up from, because it wasn't just in relationship, that everywhere. That really woke up to that when I saw that my relationship to Tony is my thinking about Tony. That's the real relationship that I'm having. I didn't like that at the beginning because it talked to me of the separateness. And it's like, no, we're not separate. We're one. We're soulmates. And so I kind of did the all traditionally what we think. And I'm not saying we're not, but I actually saw that when I step back, that true oneness is where we reside. So me trying to look at, wouldn't our relationship be better if we did this or we did that, is just something that us humans seem to do. Doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to be better or worse. But when I woke up to realize that you're not Superman, Steve, you never were and you never will be, but you can be super in the moment. But don't wear the your underwear over your trousers and go about. I know I have the S in my name, but no, just don't do it. So I think for me, that simplicity of what it was just recognizing that I didn't have to battle with relationship.
Yeah. And I love that distinction is you're not Superman, but you can be super in the moment. And there's probably going to be a lot more super moments when you're not trying to be Superman.
Yeah, right. Right.
So what's one of the favorite things that Tony does for you?
I think he allows me to be me. I think that really is my favorite thing, is even my moments of me not liking me. It's just that he'll look over, and sometimes I'm like, oh, don't give me that look, because I want to feel this way. But then it just melts me. And what was really interesting is that when we got together, because I'm the type of person I like to kind of show and so on, and Tony's not as much. You will know that he loves you and he cares because he's a very caring guy. But my world and his world was like, so if Tony made you a meal, that was love. But I was like, yeah, but flowers would be nice to go with the lovely meal. And that was really something. It took me a little while to get a long while to get used to, because that was my condition. Love is. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the easiest things is just allowing me to be me. I think that really is the greatest thing that he can actually give me, just allowing me to be me, warts and all.
That's huge.
It's a secret sauce in any relationship, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, how do you keep physical intimacy alive in your relationship?
I think we do that because, again, it's understanding more the moment. You know, I think it's like coming from, go back to what we're saying, if you define a gay man, and it's like, oh, they're always out, they're always doing this, they're always doing that. And we never were in that camp. So what was really interesting is that when we actually came together, the more spiritual intimacy was more important to it, because from that came everything else. For me, that's the simplicity of it again. It's like, that's the intimacy. That covers the physical, that covers the emotional, the practical. It just seems to be where, I don't know, it was interesting because he was kind of trying to tease me earlier on, coming on and saying, oh, so I'm going to be talked about, and so Shona the dog, and it's going to be all. I says, oh, are you? And his face was like, I said, of course you are. And he's like, oh, what are you going to say if they ask? And I says, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to say until I know. Isn't that what's happening? I say, it's like, but if I try, I'll mark this one down. I must tell him this story. I says, but I don't know. I says, but what I will express is what I'm feeling in the moment. And that's how we very much work in that way. Is just go with the flow in that moment.
Yeah, that's lovely. So one final question. If you could only say one thing to Tony, what would you want to say to him?
See, my thing is telling me too. So I'm just like, okay, I'll wait to see which one steps forward. Obviously love, but thank you.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think thank you is stealing me more. So I will go with that one. Thank you.
That's lovely, Steve.
It really is.
Thank you so much for playing along with us with our questions. It's so touching and heartwarming to hear the responses.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I feel so inspired listening to you and the way that you talk about this understanding and the way that you're using it, the way that this understanding is you and the way that you speak of it. It's just beautiful. I just really love you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's our word for you is thank you. And
yes.
it's just been such a moving experience to sit with you, hear you share, to feel the depth of love that comes through you. I mean, I've been feeling that as we've been sitting here listening to you. That's such a gift and a blessing. So very grateful that you're sharing yourself with us so generously, and look forward to staying in touch.
Me too. Thank you.
Let us know how the Norfolk Broads is. And
absolutely, yes. I will gladly let you know. You'll be more than welcome to come and hang out with us.
That would be lovely.
And what's the animal that's there?
It's a koipu. Koipu is like this giant guinea pig, like I was saying. But we'll see if it's still there.
I will, absolutely.
Might be a good rewilding story.
Yes.
Well, I'm not an indigenous species, so I don't know. Maybe not.
It might be an invasive species.
It is an invasive species, yeah.
Well, Steve, thank you. And thank Tony for letting you come on.
I will do, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for reaching out and asking me. I really enjoy this. Thank you so much.
Lots of love, Steve.
Lots of love. Take care. So just as an FYI, I know that I mentioned this creature called the Koipu that used to inhabit the Norfolk Broads, as I recall, back in the 70s, but upon further investigation, they were actually first introduced to that area by a local furrier, a fur trader, I guess, or a fur farmer, thinking it would be a great idea to have Koipu in their farm and making fur pelts, or creating fur pelts, or creating fur coats, as the case may be. I don't know what they were used for. Anyway, Koipu escapes and proliferates in the local body of water, which is the Norfolk Broads, and then subsequently became this enormous pest to the local farmers, and over the ensuing decades was finally hunted to extinction. I think it was in the late 80s, and I think they were first introduced in the late 20s, and as I say, were a real pest, particularly to the local farming community, who were at that point, or still are, I guess, the farmers of cereal crops, and I guess said Koipu had a real penchant for cereal crops, and so that's why the authorities said, got to get rid of them, get them out of here pronto. And so wasn't so pronto, took many decades, but eventually all gone by the 1980s. Anyway, I thought I'd share that with you. Hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much for listening to Rewilding Love. If you enjoyed this podcast, please let us know by subscribing on iTunes, and we would love for you to leave a review there.
iTunes reviews will steer people to this podcast who need help with their relationships.
If you would like to learn more about our work and our online rewilding community, please visit our website, therewilders.org.
Thanks for listening. Join us next week.